to Christianity. How many people in here say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. Raise your hand, please. Crickets. Half a hand, not really enthusiastic. How many people in here say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Yeah, look around the room, ladies and gentlemen. It's always the same. It's always 100 to 0 or 99 to 1. The truth is, most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. Okay? They're running from him because they don't want it to be true. So what do you do with such people? You pray for them. You plant seeds. You love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do. You have to stand in the way of evil. And you wait. Because if they're ever going to be open, it's when tragedy strikes, because it strikes all of us at some point. And if that person's open, your phone's going to ring, and that person's going to be on the other end. They're not going to call their atheist friend when tragedy strikes. What's the atheist going to say? Well, there's no rhyme or reason to this. Stuff just happens. Get over it. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. So truth does exist. In fact, if our reasoning is good at this point, does truth exist? You know what this means? That relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Tragically, almost all our universities buy into this, and many of our high schools buy into postmodernism. Why would you send your kid to a university and pay them $50,000 a year to teach your kid the truth that there is no truth? It's crazy. I know you got a TP USA Faith thing out there. My friend Charlie Kirk wrote a book called The College Scam. I recommend you get that book and start on page 222, because on page 222, he shows you ways you can get a great education without ever going to college. Now, there are some places, some professions you have to go to college, but many of them you don't. So the next question is it true that God exists? So let's go to the second question. We're going to spend most of our time actually in this question. And the first argument for God is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Now, cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, we'll see some of the scientific evidence for this here in a few minutes. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. There has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, everything's just a matter of opinion. That would just be your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Well, we know murder or torture is not just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong. If it's really wrong, there must be a standard beyond us that's really right, that we're obligated to obey. That standard is what we mean by God's nature. God doesn't exist, nothing's right or wrong. Now, we'll look at that argument later. We got to start here at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? Some of you have said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? You've never seen God move? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some people in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago. Remember, he had Lou Gehrig's disease. Usually, Lou Gehrig's disease kills you in like 2 years. This guy had it for like 40. He was a medical miracle. In any event, here's what the atheist Hawking said about the beginning. He said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the evidence. He's admitting space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. What could have caused that? We'll see here in a minute. Alexander Vilenkin, who teaches not far from here near Boston in Tufts University, who is an agnostic scientist, said this about the beginning. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, notice two interesting words in this quote. First is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. You can always get new evidence in that may overturn a previous theory. And I know you can't trust everything on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia actually has a page called something like Overturned Scientific Theories. There's like 100 of these major scientific theories that have been overturned by new evidence. But you know what? Vilenkin sees so much evidence pointing to one conclusion, and that is that the universe had a beginning, that he's willing to call it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem that there was a cosmic beginning? Because if all of nature had a beginning, whatever created nature can't be made of nature. In other words, it can't be a natural cause. It must be something beyond nature, something we would call supernature. We're going to look at what this cause could be in just a second here. Now, we're not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And number three, it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. You know what is controversial? Not that the universe had a beginning. What's controversial is what caused it. So let's take a look. What could have caused the universe to have a beginning? It seems we've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my question. Which view is more reasonable? Number one or number two? What do you say? Number two. I was at Texas A&M. This had to be 15 years ago. And one atheist said, number one's more reasonable. I said, number one? Let's look at number two for a second. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. By the way, law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. Even Aristotle recognized this. There's got to be some kind of unmoved mover that didn't have a cause itself, that has always existed. Otherwise, nothing would exist. Anyway, so I said to the audience at A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow. Right? Things don't happen like, you're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear right here in this sanctuary and start devouring people, right? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There's always a cause. In fact, we couldn't do science if we didn't rely on that. That's what science is, a search for causes. I mean, if the whole universe could pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? You wake up one morning, you look in your driveway, your Hyundai is a Tesla. And you go, how do I charge this thing? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me $3,000. If you're hungry after this and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your kitchen, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? No, it's the atheists that have all the faith. In fact, do you realize everyone believes in at least one miracle? I mean, Christians, we believe in this miracle and several others. But do you realize atheists believe in a miracle? What miracle do they believe in? Here it is. No one created something out of nothing. Now, which view takes more faith? It's the atheist. Now, think about it this way. You could ask an atheist this question. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? There would be nothing if God didn't exist. There's got to be an uncaused first cause. Now, what are the attributes of this cause? Well, look, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, out of nothing, what could have caused it? Something that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons make choices. The being would also have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research yet. This could be Allah or just some other theistic God. But if we keep looking at the evidence, if we go through the rest of this God stuff and then we look at miracles in the New Testament and we realize that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,990 years ago is the same being who in his divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We don't know this is the Christian God yet, but we have 6 attributes for what could be the Christian God. You see what I'm saying here? All right. That's the cosmological argument. The next argument is the design argument, the teleological argument, and there's 2 aspects to this. One is the universe appears designed, and secondly, you, a human being, life, appears designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned for life to exist here on Earth. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, virtually imperceptibly, there would either be no universe or certainly no universe that could support life. And there are a dozen, at least, of these attributes about our universe. Change any one of them, virtually imperceptibly, we don't exist. And in fact, let's look at what an atheist, Stephen Hawking, said about this. He said, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary argument. You can't say, well, maybe it evolved there by chance, whatever that means. Why? Because this is the initial starting, or this is the initial expansion rate. When the universe was created, it had to be precise from the very beginning. Seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate for us to be here today. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. Neither can I. So let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. And then take all those dimes, put them in one pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in that huge pile, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, ask him to pick one of those dimes at random. The chances are that he would pick that 1 red dime is 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. Look, you say, well, maybe this happened by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do a thing. Look, there's only 2 explanations for that value being where it is. Either somebody designed it to be there or it wasn't designed. What makes more sense? Somebody designed it. This is why even Christopher Hitchens, you may have mentioned, Sean mentioned, I debated him over a decade ago a couple of times. I don't know if you remember him. He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. Anyway, he said this is the hardest argument to answer for atheists. There's no other way to explain this than some mind out there created and fine-tuned everything. And it's not just The universe that appears to be designed, even locally, our solar system appears to be designed. Let's take a look at our solar system for just a second. Here we are, a third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is. That's a lie. It's way too cold here in the winter. Axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly. We don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly. We don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Without Jupiter, we couldn't exist. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these dark marks are? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Same thing is true with Saturn. In fact, let's take a look at the planets here in order size. There's you got Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then, you bigots? Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here, see it? It's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. And this is in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. Also, if you just look in our galaxy, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. Now, do you remember when the space shuttle was in orbit? We used to put the space shuttle up. You know how fast the space shuttle was going as it was going around the Earth? 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. 5 miles a second. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out if, suppose we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, 30 trillion miles. How long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. No, neither do I. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy, an average distance away, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Do you realize that if our solar system was the size of a quarter with the sun in the middle and Pluto at the outer rim, do you know where the next nearest star is? It's 2 football fields away. The heavens are awesome. We're never going to get to another planetary system. If we could go light speed, it'd be 186,000 miles per second. It would take us almost 4 years to get to another star, another planetary system. Imagine we figured that out one day. It's really too far and too dangerous, but actually what I'm going to show you now is a little bit disturbing, but I'm going to show it to you anyway because I think you can handle it. And I'm going to need some sound for this. You may have to turn the sound up a little bit. But imagine we get to another planetary system because we figured out light speed. We plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video, and she smiled just a little bit, and then she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now, look what the psalmist says about space. "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." How high are the heavens above the earth? Almost. In fact, the Hubble Space Telescope has helped us discover what's out there. A number of years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they zoomed Hubble on that spot for like 11 days of exposure time. What I'm about to show you is what they found. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this. It's in the public domain. In fact, I'm about to start a little video to show you what they found. I don't know if you can see this along the bottom. These are mountains right here. This is the southern sky, the southern hemisphere. I'm going to show you this little video, and you're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble's going to zoom out to 1/26 millionth of the sky. There is no audio. It's just a bunch of pictures put together. It's just video. You guys ready? All right, here you go. Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Let's see what they found. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Each galaxy having billions of stars of their own. Now, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star just in our galaxy going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know what the Bible means when it says the heavens declare the glory of God. Ladies and gentlemen, I never want to hear anyone at Ignite Church ever use the word awesome again unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video. No! What word are you going to say for this? What word are you going to say for God? Now, everything in our experience is finite. How do we get an idea of what God is like? He says, look to the heavens. And when you look to the heavens, what do you see? You see a virtual infinite expanse. Here's the problem. If the heavens are supposed to demonstrate to us that God is infinite, we've got a real big problem. Why? Because it means he's infinitely just. And if he's infinitely just, none of us are. So he has to punish us. But he doesn't want to because he's also infinitely loving. What does he do? Here's the second half of the verse in Psalm 103. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. How did he remove our transgressions from us if he's infinitely just? He comes to earth, he adds humanity to his deity, and he allows the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment on himself. This is why Jesus is the only way. It's not an arbitrary claim. It's not, I'm just God, I said so. No, this is the only way an infinitely just God can allow unjust people like you and me to go unpunished. He punishes someone else, an innocent substitute. Who's the only innocent substitute? Himself. This is why Paul says in Romans 3:26 that God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. He justifies sinners. Now, when you look at a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it'll take you over 200,000 years to go just between two of those sand grains in our galaxy, two of those stars, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because the stars aren't made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, the heavens were made for you. This is the second part of the design argument. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limping here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter software program we call your genome. You know, your DNA? All the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter software program, your genome, all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, well, Frank, come on, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, friends. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. In fact, that crazy bill that was just passed here in Vermont recently that said you can have an abortion all the way up to the moment of birth, that's a moral position. Turns out to be an immoral position, but it's saying a woman has a moral right to a dead baby. That's basically what it says. And when people say, well, don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? In fact, you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots. Why do you get to impose ought nots, but I don't? Actually, there's a better answer when someone says, don't impose your morality on me. I say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 2, the Gentiles are not of the law, have the law written on their hearts. Everybody knows this morality, but some people don't like it. If you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off. I mean, are you even thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, hang on, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle recognized something 2,400 years ago. Obviously, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature consistently goes in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Yeah, well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. Yet if it's properly nourished, it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature's going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be someone directing it. By the way, this is why we can do science, ladies and gentlemen, because the universe is orderly, that things repeat themselves over and over again, that there's order in nature, reliable cause and effect. Now notice, this argument is not the Big Bang cause way back when. This argument says that every single second the universe exists, someone is directing it. Remember the band this morning was up here playing music? Okay, God is to the universe what a band is to music. When a band is playing the music, it is playing and sustaining the music. It's creating and sustaining, right? What happens the second the band stops playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe, and he creates you and the natural laws that govern the universe, and he sustains the universe, and he sustains you and the natural laws that govern it every single second the universe exists. It's a right now cause. This is why the Apostle Paul came along and said, in Jesus we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says God sustains all things by his powerful word. So it's a right now cause, a sustaining cause. Now there's a lot more in the Stealing from God book on this. We don't have any more time to talk about it now. We got to move now to our third argument for the existence of God, and this is the moral argument. And probably the best way to explain this is to ask you a question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws it to the other team and they take it back for a touchdown. So how do you know? This is the interactive portion of the program. How do you know? Results, rules. What do you have to know in order to know this is a good play and this is a bad play? point of the game. You got to know the purpose of the game, right? If there's no purpose to the game, you can't say, well, this play gets us closer to the purpose to score more points than the other team, yet this play takes us further away from the purpose, right? With no purpose, you wouldn't be able to discover which of those plays was better. And notice in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When they played the Super Bowl last month, when they showed up in Arizona to play, they didn't make the rules up when they got there, right? Where did the rules come from? Well, the rules came from the commissioner and the owners. They get together, they decide what the rules are, they tweak the rules every year a little bit. But all that is set before they start to play, right? Now, in football, the rules are arbitrary. They could be different. But in life, the rules are not arbitrary. They can't be different. Because they come from outside the game, but they come from the authority outside the game, and that is God himself. In fact, if there is no God, if there is no purpose to life, then you can't say that the Nazis were wrong. Why can't you say the Nazis were wrong? Because there's no right. If there's no right outside of ourselves, it's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. A number of years ago, I had a debate with a president of the American Atheists at the time. His name was David Silverman, and he was Jewish, but he was an atheist. And so during the debate, I kept telling him, hey, David, if there's no God, the Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And he tried to avoid that conclusion, but I kept pressing him on it, and he finally said this, Frank, you're right. The Holocaust wasn't really wrong. And I said, David, you know with more certainty the Holocaust was wrong than you know atheism is true. So why would you give up your belief that the Holocaust was wrong to be an atheist? You know it's wrong. If it's wrong, there must be a standard of right that we're obligated to obey. That standard is God's nature. So you ought to become at least a theist, because you already know the Holocaust is wrong. Why would you deny that? Secondly, love is no better than rape if there is no God. Oh, you might like love better, but it's not really better. You just prefer it because there's no standard beyond you. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Do you realize in our culture we seem to create rights every 10 minutes? People say they have a right to same-sex marriage. Look, if there's no God, there's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. We have a right to an abortion. There's not only no right to an abortion, there's no right to life if there is no God. There's no rights to anything. It's just your opinion. In fact, if there is no God, slavery, murder, racism, they're not wrong. Yet we all know they are wrong. So what does that mean? That there's a standard outside of ourselves that we're obligated to obey. If there is no God, religious people have never done anything wrong. How often are you accused of doing something wrong if you're a religious person? Pastor Todd and you guys here, we're all judged for being wrong because you were a super spreader, right? All this. There's nothing wrong with, even if it was true, there's nothing wrong with being a super spreader if there's no God. That's just your opinion. By the way, when somebody calls you a hypocrite, what should you say to them? You're right. But what follows from that? That there's no God? In fact, you've just given evidence for God when you say when you say I'm a hypocrite. Why? What's wrong with being a hypocrite if there's no God? That would be just your opinion. John Dixon, who is now at Wheaton University, he's a historian originally from Australia, has a great question to ask people when they accuse you of being a hypocrite or Christians of being hypocrites. In fact, let me ask a question right here. How many people in here know of people who are not Christians because other supposed Christians have treated them poorly? Can I see your hands, please? Oh yeah, that's almost all of us. We know somebody who's staying out of the kingdom because of Christians. Here's a question that John Dixon says you ought to ask people. I think it's a good question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. right? So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. In fact, I've had some debates with Christopher Hitchens, as I mentioned. And in one of the debates, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to do. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. In fact, do you know that you can get to heaven by being good? You can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? You wouldn't need Jesus if you were perfect, would you? But none of us are. So I said to Hitchens, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. And so when people say, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. We're all hypocrites. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. Yes, I know we're saints theologically because when we trust in Christ, we're not only forgiven, but we're given his righteousness. But practically, we're still sinners, aren't we? We still do evil. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. Ladies and gentlemen, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful how you answer. Are they? Yeah, what's the difference, right? The Bible never uses the word tolerance. One place it uses it, the NIV, the Nearly Inspired Version. But actually, no, we're commanded to love. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out to them. And the way you love people is you don't tolerate the evil they do. In fact, how many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? Okay, that's all of us, right? Okay. Question, if your parents approved of everything you wanted to do as a child, would they have been loving? No, parents need to stand in the way of evil. You don't love people by approving everything they do. And our culture thinks that's love. Approve of everything I do. Affirm me everywhere. That's not love. You know what that is? That's enablement. You're watching people go over the cliff, and you're encouraging them to do it. Thomas Sowell, the famous economist who's now 92 years old, grew up in Harlem, but taught at some of the biggest universities in the world, said this: when you want to help people, you tell them what they need to hear. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Do you know that Jesus gave us one new command? What was the one new command he gave us? Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. So when we tell people what they need to hear, we're sacrificing ourselves to help them. You know why we don't tell people what they really need to hear? Because we don't want them to be mad at us. So when we do it, we're actually sacrificing ourselves. When we tell them what they want to hear, we're sacrificing them for our own benefit. So we don't have to take any of their consternation. Do you know why this country is going the way it's going? It's not because of the left and all, as much as it is because Christians are silent. Christians are hiding, we're hiding under our desks. We're not standing up. We're cowards. Churchill said the number one virtue is courage. Why? Because if you don't have courage, you won't use any of the other virtues. We need to start loving people by telling them the truth. And if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. Why can't you complain about the problem of evil? Because if there is no God, there's no such thing as evil. Why? Not because God is doing evil, but because God is the standard of good, which would allow evil to even exist. In fact, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, he went through World War I. He was an atheist after World War I. He saw too much evil. His best friend died in the war. He said, there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice in the world. Then one day he had an epiphany, and he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. If you haven't read Mere Christianity, consider yourself undereducated. You ought to read that book. It's a classic. 75 years old now or something. Anyway, here's what he said in the book. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be immoral unless something is. Something can't be not right unless something is. You see, you're assuming a standard. Where does that standard come from? It's God's nature. You see, evil doesn't exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. It's a parasite in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? Doesn't exist, right? It can only exist as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a good car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Okay, right? Doesn't exist on its own. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have good without evil. You can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but if evil exists, God exists. Not because God is doing evil, but because God is the standard of good, which allows us to even know what evil is. In fact, it's been put this way: evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Are you guys with me? So, when Christopher Hitchens said, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, he had it exactly backwards. Why? Because religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. See, I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But as I said before, if I could live up to the pure words of Christ, I wouldn't need him. Now, one last thing on this subject. What does it mean to submit? Nobody likes this word submission. The Bible tells women to submit and this and that to submit, and we can't submit. First of all, let's break the word up. What does submission mean? What does the word mission mean? You got a goal, right? You're going in a direction. You're trying to achieve something. And sub means you're putting yourself under that goal. You're going to work toward that goal. You with me? Now let's go back to football for a second. If I'm a diva receiver and I'm on the team and I keep telling the coach, you got to keep throwing me the ball. You got to keep throwing me the ball. And the coach says, look, you're going to get your chances, but we can't keep throwing you the ball all the time. If we do, we're going to lose. We got to spread the ball around if we're going to win. And I go, Coach, I understand. Okay. I'm going to take my own personal mission and subordinate it to your mission because I want the team to win. Would that be a good thing? Yeah, of course it would. And yet, in life, we often have our own missions that tell us we want to go this way, and we don't want to put ourselves under God's mission when he says go this way. Do you know why we're here? If you had to sum it up in just a sentence, why are we here? To know God and to make him known. That's why we're here. To know God. Not just believe that he exists, but to trust in him. To know God and to make him known. That's why we're here. Yet too often we want to go, no, God, I want to do my own thing. I want to go this way. Do you realize that if God exists, and he does, we would be absolutely foolish not to submit, to go our own way? We would be foolish to do that because anything we do here is just going to evaporate. We're not going to be here very long. But eternity is forever. Why would we not submit ourselves to what he wants for us? It's better for us anyway. Now, we could spend more time on that, but we don't have it. So, what can we conclude from these three arguments? From the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments. From the cosmological argument, we can see that The cause of the universe is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. You remember that? Okay, from the teleological argument, we get more data that he's intelligent, and we also see that he sustains the universe every single second. And then from the moral argument, we also see that this being is moral, that he's just and loving and righteous. Now think about this. From these three arguments, we can see that there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause who created all things, sustains all things, and is moral. This is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't have to know the Bible to know that God exists. You have to know the Bible to know who Jesus is and who the ultimate true God is. But you can show there has to be a creating, sustaining, moral being out there just by looking around. Now, you might think, well, Frank, don't atheists have arguments against this? No. Well, they have them, but they don't work. In fact, most atheists today are materialists. You know what a materialist is? Someone that thinks that everything happens as a result of the laws of physics. In other words, you don't really have a mind, you just have a brain. You don't really have a soul, you just have a body. There's no immaterial realm. You're just a moist robot. Because every thought you have is the result of just physics. You don't have free will. And C.S. Lewis, I can't say anything better than him, pointed out the fallacy in this kind of thinking. Here's what Lewis said. Here's what Lewis said. And if it doesn't come back up, no big deal. I'll just read it. Here's what Lewis said about the idea that we're just molecular machines. We're moist robots. This is a 2-page quote, so stick with me. Here's what he said. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? You with me so far? Okay, here's the second part. He says, but if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. You can't say it any better than that. They've made reason impossible by their theories. So any reason they try and give to say that God doesn't exist, they're actually stealing from God while trying to say he doesn't exist. And that's the subject of the book Stealing from God, which is out there. And there, I told you there was a God, none of you believe me. See? Look. He came back up. Now, I'm just going to do a few more minutes, then we're going to take questions, and we'll cover these other points tomorrow night at the University of Vermont. But I do want to cover are miracles possible here for just a minute. Because a lot of people don't think miracles are possible. They don't think they can occur. And one of the reasons for this is because they don't think they've ever seen a miracle, so they can't happen. And of course, some people believe miracles are impossible. For example, Noah. Is this being recorded? All right, let's try and keep this just between us and here. Can we all agree, ladies and gentlemen, that Noah and the ark is crazy? Come on, really? Crazy? How many people here have ever seen anyone rise from the dead after this? I don't know what happened there, but something blew up. How many people have ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Yet for us to be Christians, we have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is the LED screen. The big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with, can you really believe in Jonah? Actually, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection, actually. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if it's true that God created the entire universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course. Can he raise Jesus from the dead if he created the universe out of nothing? Of course. Can he do the Noah miracle? Can he do the Jonah miracle? Can he walk on water? Can he part the Red Sea? Of course he can. Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Now, the interesting thing is that the atheists are admitting that Genesis 1:1, the evidence for Genesis 1:1. If I could show you, I would, but I can't. We said it earlier. Stephen Hawking admits. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. They're admitting the evidence for Genesis 1:1. If Genesis 1:1 is true, they don't think it's God, but who else could it be? It's got to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, right? So if Genesis 1:1 is true, you can believe every other verse in the Bible. Now, here's the problem. I realize that some people are going to say, well, you know, Frank, I can't believe in a miracle because I've never seen one. First of all, you might want to look around. You're living in a miracle. This universe is a miracle. But secondly, you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of math. Have you ever seen those? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? No, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself. Why? Because it's not a material thing. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love. And everyone in here believes in love. But you've never seen it. Why? Because it's an immaterial reality. You may have seen people love, you may have been in love, but you've never seen it, yet you believe in it. In fact, in the second debate with Hitchens, one kid at the university or at the college in New Jersey during the Q&A asked Hitchens this question, Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, like Lewis was talking about, thinking everything's made of molecules, said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have it. No, love is not a chemical. It's an action. And it's grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, no. Look, that's gravity right there. Nope. You're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. And if someone ever asks you, how do you know that God exists? Here's what I think you ought to say. I know God exists because of his effects. In other words, you believe in cause and effect. Look, if there's a creation, that's the effect. So you're reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in you, life, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on your heart, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a moral lawgiver. After all, where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. If you have the ability to think, you have a mind, rationality, laws of logic, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause, a mind. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause. Who could have done that? God. In other words, you're always reasoning from effect to cause. Even if you think you've had a personal experience with God, that personal experience is an effect, and what you're saying is the cause of that personal experience is God. You're always reasoning from effect back to cause. And ironically, the atheists who claim to be champions of science, they, for some reason, don't think there has to be an ultimate cause. Or if they do, they think this thing just came into existence out of nothing. We're the rational ones. Christians are the ones saying, I believe in cause and effect. And I see effects all around me that require a cause like God. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington. And you've never seen Jesus physically, but you still believe he exists. Why? Because he leaves effects behind. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. Now, there don't need to be miracles since the New Testament times for Christianity to be true. There could have been no miracles since the New Testament times, and Christianity would still be true. I think there have been miracles since then, but you don't need miracles, modern-day miracles, to show that Christianity is true. However, for atheism to be true, every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be mistaken. Is that possible? It's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No, I don't think so. Now, if miracles do occur, and miracles are used to get our attention to say, this guy speaks for God. I mean, why did people follow Moses? Because Moses could do miracles. Why did people follow Elijah and Elijah? Because they could do miracles. Why did people follow Jesus and the apostles? Because they could do miracles. But if miracles do occur today, and even back then, they had to be rare. Why? Because if they occurred all the time, they wouldn't get our attention as special acts of God. I mean, imagine if people rose from the dead routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. Right? No, it's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. The only way you can detect a miracle is against the backdrop of regular events that happen over and over and over again. In fact, there are so many things that occur in real life that if they didn't occur every single day, we would call them a miracle. They're amazing, but they happen every day. We don't call them miraculous. Like, for example, how many people in here have seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand, and just a few of the men, right? Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of another human being or yourself, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. How did this happen? It happens every day, but we don't call it a miracle. But there's obviously intelligence behind it. It's an effect that requires a being like God. Now, we're going to have to finish this up tomorrow night at University of Vermont because we're running out of time here. I couldn't get through it all. But tomorrow night at University of Vermont at 6:30. 6:30? Is it at 6:30? 6:30. We're going to go through this and we'll get to the New Testament and you'll see that Jesus really did rise from the dead. I think the evidence is there for that. But the best news of it all, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we see this, someone actually did die for you. That's the best news. And now our job is to not only know who died for us, but to make him known. He works through us to get his word out. So since no one likes to ask the first question, let's move right on to the second question. We have some mics set up. Which mic are we going to use here, Sean? This one right here? Why don't you just use this one? So why don't we just pop up here? Any questions anyone has? Can be on anything. Doesn't have to be on just what we talked about here.
Check, check.
I don't know if I'll have any PowerPoint for you because it's still searching, but unless it just kind of popped out somehow. I don't know what happened. Oh, the battery's dead? Oh, second law of thermodynamics right there. Look at that. Anyone have a question? Don't make me tell jokes as we're waiting. Look, once the first person actually asks a question, then the floodgates open. All right, so one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron, and the second said to the first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. That's my science joke right there. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir. What's your name?
Tyler.
Say again? Tyler, go ahead, sir.
So sorry if these aren't all formulated correctly. I have some I wanted to ask you. I don't want to take up too much time, but
all right.
One thing that I struggled with when I was first getting saved, thanks for everything you do, by the way, a huge part in me being saved was understanding things logically and deeply. So I think most people, at least most of my circle, have an issue with, like, they think you have to throw out reason completely when you come to faith. What advice or just what would you say about the role of reason and pragmatism in coming to faith in general?
Well, the first thing I would ask them is, first of all, what do you mean by reason? Ask them, what do you mean by reason? And see if they can describe it. And then, what is the source of reason? What are the source of the laws of logic? These are immaterial laws that obviously don't exist in a physical way. Where did they come from? And I think they're grounded in the nature of God, just like moral laws are grounded in the nature of God. So I would ask them, what do you mean by reason? By the way, faith and reason are not opposed. The opposite of reason is not faith. The opposite of reason is irrationality, right? The opposite of faith is not reason. The opposite of faith is to distrust, because really the word faith means to trust. Remember, we talked about earlier that belief that is intellectual. Belief in means to trust. And in the Greek, the word does mean trust. So you're trusting in what you have good reason to believe. So faith and reason are not at odds. Reason and irrationality are at odds. And faith and distrust, or trust and distrust, are at odds. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know that you kind of take the wisdom view, and I've recently have discovered sufficiency of Scripture myself, and really valuing God's word and through His wisdom.
Yes.
And kind of taking that approach first, and that's really helped me.
Yeah, what you're speaking of is a thing that Christians argue over. How do you know God's will? And I know that most people in here are going to disagree with me, but I'll just give you my view. There's two major views on this. One view is that there's an X marks the spot, that God has one person for you to marry, one school for you to go to, one job for you to take, and you've got to find out all the little hints that reveal that. The other view is, no, God just gives you a window, a moral window in which you need to stay, and you get to pick inside that moral window. For example, who you're going to marry, just marry somebody in the Lord, says the Scriptures. If you marry somebody outside the Lord, you're not doing God's will. If you marry somebody inside that window, that moral window, then you've created God's will in your life, okay? Now, I think the wisdom view makes more sense. Why? Because, well, why would God even give us, say, a book of Proverbs if He's going to tell us what to do every day, right? It wouldn't lead to maturity either if you're always saying, God, what do you want me to do? He wouldn't tell you to go seek the counsel of other people if He was going to tell you what to do every day. Now, I'm not saying He can't do that or doesn't do that on occasion. He might tell you something directly to do. But most of the time, He's going to work through the wisdom view. And my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, used to always say this: the will of God is never contrary to the Word of God. I mean, maybe Pastor Todd has had this. I know some pastors have told me that they'll have people come to them in counseling and say, God told me to leave my wife, right? And there's not been any adultery. There's no reason for this. And Geisler would always tell them, no, the will of God's never contrary to the Word of God. You're not getting that from God. You're getting that from Satan, because it goes against the Word of God. The Word of God is our final authority, not any feeling or hint that we have. So I think the wisdom view makes more sense. And there's a whole book on this. It's called Decision Making in the Will of God. It's like 40 years old. You can get it if you want. And it goes into both views very, very extensively. Anyway.
Yeah, and so with all the science topics that you talked about in the realm of apologetics, and in thinking about the metaphysics of Christianity, like natural theology, I think you said.
Yes, natural theology, yeah.
Is there anything that cannot be explained by natural causes, or is it all eventually investigatable by science, or eventually explained by science?
Well, the universe itself can't be explained by natural causes, because the universe itself had a beginning, so it must be something outside of the natural world. The laws of nature themselves are laws that govern the natural world, but they're not part of the natural world. They weren't created by the natural world. They're from outside, it seems to me, outside the world, governing the world. One of the arguments for what's known as intelligent design is that information requires intelligence, and we find information in the cell. What's information? Your DNA. I mentioned earlier it's 3.5 billion letters long. Let's say imagine you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary. What are you going to assume? The waves did that? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that someone, John or Mary, did that, right? In other words, an intelligence did that. Messages in all our experience come from minds. So when you see a message that's 3.5 billion letters long, who could have done that? Natural laws can't do that. If natural laws can't make John loves Mary, natural laws are not going to make a message 3.5 billion letters long. So this is positive evidence, it seems for me, for intelligence. It's not just we lack a natural cause. That would be what's known as a God of the gaps argument. Oh, we just don't have a cause for the gap in our knowledge, so let's just plug God in there. No. When you see John loves Mary in the sand, you don't just lack a natural explanation. That's positive evidence for an intelligent being, John or Mary. And so this is what the intelligent design movement is built on. And the best website for intelligent design stuff is probably discovery.org. Discovery.org. You may want to check that out.
Awesome.
All right?
And one more. So, and I appreciate it. Thank you. So we can apply apologetics for God's existence, Jesus' resurrection. Part of my salvation was, reading the Bible and seeing that there is truth in God's wisdom. I know you recently spoke with Ray Comfort. He takes the approach of, convicting people of their sin, the Holy Spirit doing the rest. What if someone isn't necessarily seeing truth in the Bible? I'm curious if you know of anything where, like, apologetics in the realm of why sin is sin, or like sociology from a Christian worldview, or psychology, things like that.
I think we have a great capacity to deceive ourselves. I think we say we're searching for God, but really we're not. We're searching for excuses so we can do what we want to do. In fact, Paul says it in Romans chapter 1 that we suppress the truth and unrighteousness to go our own way. God's invisible qualities and divine attributes are clearly seen so that men are without excuse, but we suppress the truth to go our own way. So if someone is truly seeking for God, they're ultimately going to find him. God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. But too often we're running the other way, right? Yeah. So if someone says, I'm seeking and I haven't found, well, just keep seeking. What does Jesus say? Keep knocking. Just keep going. It might be, here's some reasons why God may have not shown up to this person yet, or he doesn't think God exists. God may be actually keeping him an atheist or non-believer for a while, so he makes more atheist friends, and then 2 years from now when he becomes a Christian, he's got more influence with those people, right? There may be reasons for God holding back right now. Maybe this guy's not ready yet, but just keep seeking. Does that make sense?
Great, yeah.
All right.
And then after, talking with people and applying this apologetic stuff that you just spoke of, say they do come to Jesus, or maybe they're like on board with everything you're saying, but they're like, well, what does this relationship with Jesus even look like? I don't even understand it. What would you kind of, elevator pitch?
Well, you gotta certainly read the Bible. You've got to get people who know it better than you do. This is what discipleship is. You got to get into a healthy, well-balanced church. You've got to immerse yourself with other Christians. You've got to practice the disciplines of study, of meditation, of prayer, and fellowship, and service. You practice those things, then you can become a disciple. Remember, Jesus didn't say go make believers. He said go make disciples. And I think the hardest thing to do for any church, and I think probably Pastor Todd would agree with me because of the kind of culture we're in, the hardest thing to do is to make disciples. You can make believers, you can get people in the door, but how do they become more and more like Jesus? We're so distracted. This little thing right here is a blessing and a curse, right? On one hand, it's a blessing because you can get, there is no excuse now. You can get evidence sitting in your bathroom, right, for Christianity. On the other hand, you can be distracted every 5 seconds and you could be pulled off the truth and deceived by this. I was just talking to a lady on our board. Her name is Buff. She's been on our board ever since we started in 2006. She's 69 years old. She works at Starbucks, not for the money really, but just for ministry. This lady is a saint. She just told me the other day, she goes, on my break, I go back and see some of the other young teenage girls on their break. Some of them are trying to transition and become boys, and all they do is they sit on their phone on TikTok, and they watch one affirmation video after another saying, oh, what you're doing's right, what you're doing's right. Yeah, transition, transition, transition. And Buff just says, I did some things when I was a teenager that I'm still paying for. This is not the road you want to go down. The road you're going down is irreversible. You may not think you want children, but trust me, a few years from now, you probably will. And what are you going to do when you already had the mastectomy and already started taking all these hormones? What's going to happen then? Have you heard of the girl, Chloe Cole? Have you heard of this girl? Yeah, she's out in California. She's 18 now. When she was 15, doctors cut off her breasts. And now she's 18, and she's suing her doctors. What did you do to me? You can't give informed consent when you're 15. This is why gender clinics in the UK are closing, because they were a few years ahead of us with this, but now people are starting to sue them, and due to the liability, they're closing. Hopefully that's going to happen here, because it's child mutilation. It's child abuse. We shouldn't be doing this to our kids. And yet, so much of it is affirmed on this. So it's hard to make disciples when you have this. And when people are getting all affirmation from what they're seeing on social media.
Yeah, so live godly lives and people will see the fruit of your life.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Frank.
God bless you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Oh, I'm Edmund.
Edmund, go ahead, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, how you doing?
I've got a couple.
Go ahead.
The first one is really apologetics a little bit. What are your thoughts on the saying, if you can be argued into being a Christian, you can be argued out of it?
Yeah, well, the same thing can be true with regard to emotions, right? If you come to Christ in emotions, you can be talked out of it through emotions as well, right? But emotions are fickle. They change all the time. The facts don't change. If the facts are good, and so far they've stood the test of 2,000 years, and even before that with regard to the beginning of the universe and the fact that there has to be a first cause and uncaused first cause, I don't think the facts are going to change. So the evidence is much stronger and more stable than emotions. Emotions come and go. In fact, a friend of mine put it this way: emotions make life delicious, but logic makes life safe. And so we have to use reason and be grounded in reason. What else can we be grounded in? If it's just emotion, emotion can come and go, but logic and facts stay forever if they're really true. This is why C.S. Lewis famously said that faith, meaning trust, is where you have to tell your emotions to get off. He said there were times when he was a non-Christian and looking at Christianity and he's worried, that really looks true. And then there were other times after he became a Christian, he'd look at Christianity and go, oh, I don't know if this is true. Maybe it's not. And he had to keep telling himself, no, you've already studied this. You already know the evidence, right? Your psychology can change with the weather, and it probably does up here quite a bit, doesn't it? Right? Don't allow your psychology to overpower the evidence. In fact, let me give you an example of this. Some people cannot get on an airplane because psychologically it freaks them out. They think they're going to die, right? But what does the evidence show you? The evidence shows you that the safest way to get anywhere is on an airplane. You should be more afraid getting in your car than when you get on an airplane, statistically. Yet we often allow our psychology to overpower the evidence. We often allow this psychology to say, well, I can't get on an airplane, even when the evidence is showing airplane travel is safe. We shouldn't do that with eternity, right? We should allow the evidence to dictate what we're going to believe about eternity, not our psychology. That would be tragic. In fact, a friend of mine, Greg Kokel, the guy who wrote the book Tactics, great book you got to get. He says, before I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, I'm an atheist. After I have my first cup, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. By the time I have my second cup, I'm back to being a Christian again, right? What's changing, him or the evidence? The evidence hasn't changed. He's changing. Psychology. Don't allow your psychology to overpower the truth.
Second question, I'm pretty sure you've answered this on the internet before, but what, biblically speaking, do you believe is the role of the church and the Christian in holding the secular world to the godly standard?
We are supposed to be salt and light. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the conscience of the state. We're supposed to do what's right and leave the results to God. If we truly love people, we'll want to put laws in place that are best for everyone. And that's what Jefferson brilliantly did, is when he and his colleagues established the United States of America, he didn't want to have one state church, but he wanted to base, in fact, he didn't want to have atheism either, because there'd be no way to have God-given human rights. So he wanted God-given human rights without the intolerance of any particular religious sect. So he came up with the perfect third alternative, where he said, basically, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence is grounded in natural law, which comes from God, same source, but you don't need the Bible to know what that is. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and governments instituted among men to secure these rights. And what was happening, of course, back at our founding, was King George was not securing our rights. He was legislating immorally. And so Jefferson and his cohort said, we have the right to a new government, a government that will secure our rights, because our rights come from God, they don't come from government. So if Christians are not salt and light, then what's going to happen to society? It's going to continue to erode. So if you look at our society now, the reason, in my view, the society is going the way it's going, it's mostly because we haven't been salt and light. And we should be. That's why I appreciate you guys having TP USA Faith out here. Because Charlie Kirk is doing great work. And he's pointing that out. And he's, in fact, I was just speaking at a high school 2 days ago in Charlotte, and I saw a TP USA thing on a guitar, so I sent it to Charlie. I said, hey, you're making an impact over here. And then I walk in here, I sent him a picture of this. I go, everywhere I go, you're here, you know. And that's good. We got to stand up for truth. You know, a lot of people say, we should just preach the gospel, not be involved in politics at all. First of all, if you think politics, or if you think the gospel is important, you better think politics are important. Why? Because you can't preach or live the gospel in places where politically they've ruled it out. Can we have this church in North Korea? Can we have this church in Iran? Can we have this church in Saudi Arabia? Can you live any way you want as a Christian in China? No. Politics affects your ability to live and preach the gospel. So for no other reason you ought to be involved politically is to protect religious rights and the ability to preach and live the gospel. Secondly, 2 sentences should clear this whole thing up. Let me ask you this. Should Christians care how other people are treated? Is anyone going to say no? Next question. Should Christians care how people are treated by government?
Yes.
Okay, that's political. Got to be involved.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Edmund. Good question. Yes, ma'am, and then we'll go over here.
I would like you to comment on what happens to a culture that rejects the Judeo-Christian God and cause and effect and logic. Is there always a path that they follow? What happens to a culture that does those kinds of things?
Well, if you look at history, most of the great cultures that gave up on decent, say, sexual behavior have eroded from within. You can look back to the ancient Sumerians, you can look back to the Roman Empire, you can look to all sorts of different cultures over history. If we're going to learn from history, if you break down the biological 2-parent family, everything goes basically to hell. And that's where we're heading. And by the way, who gave us that? We did. Why? Where did no-fault divorce come from? Who was the first governor to approve of no-fault divorce? Anyone know?
Reagan?
Ronald Reagan. 1969, 1970. And it was well intended because there were too many people in abusive marriages, and so he was trying to free people up. The problem was it was too liberal, and that particular law spread all over the country, state by state, and Reagan later regretted it. And what kind of marriage model did we buy into? Not the covenant marriage model, that we're supposed to stay together till death do us part for better or worse. We bought into the romance model, that you've got these feelings and that's why you get married, and once those feelings go, oh, you have a right to find somebody else. Again, I keep quoting C.S. Lewis because he was so brilliant on all these things. If you read the chapter in marriage in Mere Christianity, here's what Lewis says. He says, when you first meet somebody for the first time that you're attracted to, you know, you have that infatuation stage where all you can think of is the other people or the other person. That's all you can think of. And people think when that feeling goes that the love is over. And Lewis says that's not true love. That particular infatuation feeling you have when you first meet someone romantically may be the explosion that starts the relationship, but it's not the engine that keeps it going. In fact, you wouldn't want that feeling to last for very long. Why? What could you do with the rest of your life if all you felt like was that all the time? Your heart beating out of your chest like a hummingbird. You can't focus on anything except the other person. He goes, that would be highly undesirable if you tried to keep that feeling alive. And then think about this. Why do you have a vow in marriage? The only reason you have a vow is not when you're feeling like that. The only reason you have a vow is when you're not feeling like that. You don't need a vow when you're all lovey-dovey. You need a vow when you don't like the other person, right? Yet we bought into the romance view of marriage, and that led to same-sex marriage, which is really genderless marriage. Why? Because if marriage is just about the romantic feelings of two people, well, why not two same-sex people? Because marriage isn't just about feelings. Marriage is a covenant relationship between the couple and God to procreate and bring forth the next generation. That's what it's really about. So it's our fault that our culture's going this way. And back to Edmund's question, the reason it continues to go this way is because we're not speaking up enough and we're not out there trying to love people with the truth. Does that make sense? Amen. All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So, while it's evident that many atheists don't believe in God because they don't want to believe in God, you're not going to fix the hedonist per se, but what do you do with the person who doesn't want to believe in God because of an enormous amount of pain? Like, I have a neighbor who had an alcoholic father, and it's obvious when any time faith comes up, there's just this because we're hitting into that sort of father image pain, and there's a level of fury there. Do you have, I mean, apart from, as you mentioned, prayer and patience and love, is there any resource, is there anything that you could offer that person, that might sort of speak to dealing with that pain, processing that pain in relation to the existence of God? Anything you've come across?
Well, it's very difficult to want a relationship with your heavenly Father when your relationship with your earthly father has been so poor, right? In fact, Paul Vitz at New York University a number of years ago did a study, and he called it the faith of the fatherless. And what he looked at were the top atheists over the past 200 years, people like Nietzsche, Hume, Marx, just a who's who of atheists. And he said every one of them had either a bad relationship or no relationship with his father. So how do you deal with that? That's a hard question. I think it might be that you befriend them, as I mentioned earlier, and just talk through those issues and be patient because it's going to take a long time. It might be that you ask the question at the appropriate time, those things that your father did, maybe he was alcoholic, maybe he was abusive, why were those things wrong? And see what they say. Because they wouldn't be wrong unless God existed, right? There would just be his opinion against your opinion. In fact, I'll relate a story that happened. I was in South Dakota. This had to be 6-7 years ago. And we were doing Q&A in a church, and some guy got up to the microphone like right there, and he had this piece of paper, and he started to read the question, and he started crying. Like he couldn't get through the question. So I just walked down to him, and I said, "Sir," and he handed me the paper, and he just said, read it. And so I'm reading it as I'm walking back up to the platform. And by the time I got back up here, I realized that guy was upset for two reasons. Reason number one, he had just discovered recently that his, I think, a couple years prior, he had discovered that his 16-year-old daughter was being molested by a supposed friend of his who was about 50 years old, and he'd been doing it for like 10 years. In his own house, under his nose, never knew it. The second reason he was upset was because his two sons, who were Christians before this happened, said, there can't be a good God because he allowed this to happen. In fact, one of them was going to a Roman Catholic seminary, and he walked out of the seminary and said, there is no God. So he's like, well, what do I do? Well, I said, well, let's go to dinner, because we're not going to talk about this in front of everybody, right? But I said, when the time is right, you may want to say to your sons two things. Number one, if there is no God, what that man did to your sister wasn't really wrong. And number two, I got to tell you one other thing. The guy who did this, everybody knows he did it, but he's still walking the streets. Why? Because every time the trial starts, Jessica, the one who was being abused, psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him. If she doesn't testify, he doesn't go to jail. So I said, what you may want to say to your sons is, if there is no God, the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. Because there's no justice if there is no God. There's not going to be any justice in the afterlife either. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? There's no justice? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know what happened is unjust. But justice only makes sense if God exists. He's the standard, and he's the only one that can ensure it's done, ultimately. So it might be you can go down that road with the person and be ready for a lot of tears and comfort. And then the question might be, well, why doesn't God stop these kinds of things? In fact, I was at Michigan State a number of years ago, and I knew there was an atheist in the audience because he sat through the entire 2-hour presentation like this. I mean, he didn't crack a smile once, and I had some pretty good jokes in there. Anyway, when the Q&A came up, I said, are there any questions? And he was on this side of the room, his hand shut up. I said, yes, sir. He said, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? And I said, sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day. Do you ever notice when we complain about evil, we always complain about somebody else doing it? God, why don't you stop her? God, why don't you stop him? We never say, God, why don't you stop me? Question, if God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? None of us would be. So what does God ultimately do with evil? He gives us free will so we can choose, make choices, which means we can love or we can choose to do evil. But he also knows he can redeem evil. That's why Christ came. So God gives us the ability to do good, but also the ability to do evil. And ultimately, what is God going to do with evil? He's not going to take away our free will. What's he going to do? What's the ultimate destination for evil? Hell. That's it. He's not going to take away people's free will. He's going to quarantine them in a place called hell. And those that have accepted forgiveness are going to be with him in a remade heavens and earth in physical bodies eventually. You know, now you die, you're absent from the body, present with the Lord. One day, your body's going to rise out of the tomb, reunite with your soul, and you're going to live a physical existence. So, if that's not true, there's no ultimate, first of all, there's nothing right or wrong, and there's no ultimate justice.
And heading for the moral argument would probably, I mean, not in an argumentative way, but
No.
it would work well because typically hurting angry people have a hyper sense of justice.
Yes.
So-
And the question you might ask is, who are you mad at if there is no God?
True, yeah.
Right? How can you be mad at God if he doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Right? Now, the book Stealing from God has a whole chapter on this. You may want to check it out.
Okay.
All right?
So Timmy here is 8 and he had a question.
No, don't ask a question from an 8-year-old. They have the best questions. And I don't know how to answer them. It's always the youngest ones that have the best answers. Go ahead, Timmy.
So, do you want me to ask it? You, wanna
You
ask
can do it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I want to know, how do you know the scriptures were true? How do you know they were thus made up by somebody back then?
Oh, excellent question. Actually, we're going to cover that a lot tomorrow night, but let me give you a short answer. Because one of the answers is there's too many embarrassing things in the scriptures they never would have invented, right? Like Peter denies Christ 3 times. That's embarrassing. They never would have invented that. They all ran away while the women were the brave ones, right? Right. And who wrote it down? Men, right? You know, they appear to the women first. Jesus appears to the women first. I actually had a woman come up to me once. She said, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that, right? And they're seen as dim-witted, Timmy. Notice if you read the New Testament, if you read that, they don't know what Jesus is doing half the time, right? Well, we didn't know what he meant. We didn't know what he was saying. You know, they keep getting corrected. Jesus calls Peter Satan. Do you think they made that up? No, they would have never made that up. There's just too many embarrassing things. Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. He's called a madman. His own brothers don't believe in him. His family thinks he's out of his mind, right? They're not making it up. So that's, in fact, let me ask you this question, Tim. And let me ask this question of everybody. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad, to embarrass yourself? No, you don't do that. The New Testament has so many embarrassing things, and the Old Testament as well, that they never would have invented. It's not a made-up story. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. It's a great question, Timmy. Thank you. All right. We have one more? No? Head fake. All right. Yes, come on up. I want to put up a slide here just in case any of you want to. That wasn't it. That wasn't what I was trying to do. Hang on a second. Hold on. How come my cursor isn't working? Hold on, sorry. That might be why. Sorry, go ahead, ask your question, I'll find this, maybe.
I can give you a minute.
Go ahead, what's your name?
Kelsey.
Say again?
Kelsey.
Kelsey, go ahead, Kelsey, I'm sorry.
In my experience,
Uh-huh.
anyway, conversations that start with some of these details, talking
Uh-huh.
about apologetics, are either talking with somebody who's either not educated enough
Uh-huh.
or doesn't actually care enough
Right.
to discover the details.
Right.
So do you have any advice on, like, when you see, like, oh, this is kind of, their goal isn't really to understand, what do you do then?
Yeah, they're apathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I had the cure for apathy, first of all, everyone would be a Christian because I could get them to care, and B, I'd be a billionaire, right? That's why I always ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If they hesitate or say no, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. And then you might ask them, why are you not interested? Why would you not be interested in eternity? Just see what they say. Why would you not be interested if God really exists and wanted a relationship with you, but gave you enough distance so you wouldn't have to have one with him? Why wouldn't you want to have a relationship with him? So I would just ask some questions and see. And too often, it's not a head problem. It's a hard problem, right? They don't want to give up something that they think they're going to have to give up. And in fact, you guys have probably been tracking on social media how many high-profile Christian leaders have deconstructed. Have you heard of this new term, deconstruction? Of course, when they deconstruct out of Christianity, they don't seem to recognize that they're reconstructing a new faith that has less evidence than Christianity. But I have never seen a deconstruction, maybe there are exceptions, but I've never seen a deconstruction that didn't at some point cite Christian sexual morality as being a problem. It's always related to sex at some point. They don't want any sexual restrictions. That's why I ask them sometimes, if God wanted you to behave a certain way sexually, would you obey him? You know what the answer is most of the time? No. Okay. What can you do at that point? Let's just go have pizza then. Doesn't matter. If God were to show up right now and say, do this and don't do this, you'd still say, no, I'm going to do my own thing. Okay, gives you the right to do that. But since he's infinitely just, there's ultimately going to be consequences, rightfully so. All right?
Second question.
Yes.
Any resources you would advise for like layman practice or guidance on these conversations?
Yes, the best book out there is called Tactics by Greg Koukl, Koukl, friend of mine, and those books will help you. Also, download our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examine, because it's got a quick answer section in there, and it shows you some of the questions you ought to ask other people, all right? In fact, if you text the word evidence to this phone number, we're going to send you links to all that stuff. All right? Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, get the book Tactics, because it will help you converse with people, which is half the battle, just having good conversations. And if you read Tactics, you'll see that most of the tactics are just asking good questions. In fact, let me give you 3 of the biggest questions you want to have in your arsenal. And they can be used for anything. Like, if someone says something like, well, I can't trust the Bible because it's been changed throughout the centuries. Don't go into a dissertation as to why it hasn't been changed throughout the centuries. You just want to ask 3 questions. The first question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's been changed throughout the centuries? Because you know what people probably think? We got the Bible like the telephone game. You know the telephone game? You know, I tell you something, you tell it to him, and it gets all the way around the room, it's all jumbled up. That's not how we got the Bible. But that's what they think, right? Second question, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what evidence do you have for that position? If you ask for evidence, they're probably not going to have any. Because most people believe what they believe on religious matters based on slogans. They've heard a slogan, and they like the slogan. But if you ask them for evidence for the truth of the slogan, they can't do it. So you ask them, well, what evidence do you have that the Bible's been changed throughout the centuries? They're not going to give you any. In fact, you want to customize that question. How did you come to that conclusion, or what evidence do you have for that position? You could say, what evidence do you have for that position? Have you investigated the manuscript evidence for yourself? I guarantee you the person isn't going to say, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts, right? Nobody's going to say that. So before they're going to accept your idea, your worldview, they have to begin to doubt their worldview. So you've got to start planting some seeds of doubt about what they believe, and the way you do that is to ask questions that they can't answer. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? The third question is, have you ever considered, which is a nice intro for you to provide evidence back. So you might say, have you ever considered, we didn't get the Bible like the telephone game. We got the Bible because, like say the New Testament, Jesus said and did certain things, and eyewitnesses or people that knew eyewitnesses wrote it down. And then they copied the manuscript so much that we can reconstruct the original with more than 99.5% accuracy. So we know what the original said. That's how we got the Bible. Now, these three questions, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered, you can use for anything, not just religious matters. Parents, you can use this on your kids, right? Suppose you get a call from a teenager one night. Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to. Don't panic. First question, what do you mean by that? Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Third question, have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 3 weeks? Be right home, Dad. By the way, husbands, never, ever, ever use these questions on your wives. Because if she calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? If I asked that question of my wife, she'd have a list 37 years long, right? I'd be sunk. But those 3 questions are critical. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Somebody calls you a bigot. What do you mean by that? As soon as you ask them, they're going to be in trouble. What is bigotry? Well, you don't agree with me. Well, you don't agree with me. Does that make you a bigot? Right? I mean, as soon as they try and define these hate words they use on you, if you ask them for clarification, I once had a same-sex marriage advocate called me a bigot, and I'd written this book called Correct, Not Politically Correct, How Same-Sex Marriage Hurts Everyone. He called me a bigot. I said, what do you mean by bigotry? He said, fear and intolerance. I said, that's not the definition of bigotry. Those are 2 new words that need to be defined. The definition of bigotry is having a firm opinion on something without having investigated the subject. And I've written a whole book on this thing, so with all due respect, if anybody's a bigot in this conversation, it's you, because you're accusing me of something, and you haven't even read why I believe what I believe. So don't let people shut you down when they start calling you names. Ask for clarification. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? You can also say things, and this is from the book Tactics as well. If someone asks you a question on a controversial issue and you know it's going to be controversial, what you ought to do is you ought to say, do you consider yourself a tolerant person? Suppose they ask you, what do you think about same-sex marriage? Or what do you think about transgenderism? First question you ought to ask is, do you consider yourself a tolerant person? What are they going to have to say? Well, of course I am. Then you can say, great, because if I have an opinion different from yours, you'll tolerate it then, right? What are they going to say? If they say no, they're not tolerant. I've noticed that the people who say they're fighting for inclusion, tolerance, and diversity are not very inclusive, tolerant, or diverse. You notice that? It's my way or the highway. They're like saying, you better agree with me that diversity is our greatest strength. I better agree with you that diversity is our greatest strength? Well, suppose I have a diverse opinion. No, sorry. See, they use the words as if they're diverse when really they're not. Those are just code words for you better trust and agree with everything we say or we're gonna hurt you. That's right. In fact, I got fired from 2 Fortune 500 companies back in 2011 because I had written a book called Correct, Not Politically Correct. And in the name of inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, I was excluded, not tolerated for holding a diverse view. So I asked the HR director at Cisco, the company that fired me, I said, what does inclusion, tolerance, and diversity mean? How am I being excluded and not tolerated for holding a diverse view? She couldn't answer the question because there is no answer. It's just hypocritical. I said, we ought to treat everyone with respect regardless of what we believe sexually. And why are we even talking about this at work? In fact, I wrote an article on our website, and it was on townhall.com. It's called Sex at Work. Do not Google that. It'll take you to Harvey Weinstein's website. No, okay? Go to our website, crossexamine.org. In the little search bar, type in Sex at Work. You'll find the article. And basically, I tell what happened with Cisco and Bank of America, 2 firms that fired me. I asked the question, why are we even talking about sex at work? Why is corporate America obsessed with sex at work? Are we supposed to have sex at work? What does this have to do with making widgets? Nothing. And you know why they keep talking about it? Because Christians are silent. Because we're hiding under our desks. You got to go to them and say, hey, can I just ask you a question? Why? What does this have to do with workplace productivity? As long as everyone treats one another with dignity and respect, because everyone's made in the image of God, what does it matter what we believe about what we can and can't do sexually? Why is that even a question for the workplace? We're not running a brothel here. Well, maybe we are. You're absolutely right, yeah. All right. You want to close this down, Sean? Thank you for being here. I hope you can come tomorrow night. Bring all your friends tomorrow night and pray it all goes well. We never know what kind of reception we're going to get. Thank you for being here.
Big hand for Dr. Turek. All right, it was amazing. Before we close out, I want to share kind of one thing with everybody. I used a lot of my apologetic studies a couple of years ago. I worked with this guy at work. I worked up in St. Albans. I'm in physical therapy, and I worked with this other guy, and he was basically stark atheist. You know, you live, you die, you're worm food. That's basically it. And I used some of these apologetic techniques with him, and I planted seeds for about two or 3 years. He and his family moved back to Georgia, and I get some random text from him. And he texts me and he says, I want to let you know that all of our conversations were all for naught. I'm now a believer in Jesus Christ. So the one thing that he told me was, you did something that nobody else has ever done. And he said, you listened to me. You just listened. You were the first person where even if you didn't agree with what I said, because you listened, it just made a conversation so attractive. You know, there's a reason why God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth, you know. It says to preach the gospel always and sometimes speak. You know, so that listening that we do with other people, and like Dr. Turek said, asking questions makes an incredible difference in how we minister to people. Be an example of Christ always, because people notice it. They notice when there's something very different about us. We walk with a different stride, okay? And my heart and my passion here with having Dr. Turek here is, you know, church, we can't be complacent anymore, okay? There are things going on in our state where we need to stand up and we need to speak the truth. And one of the biggest things that Scripture warns about is a lukewarm church, you know? So I don't know about anybody else, but I know I'm getting to the point where I'm getting tired, you know? And when we stand up as Christians and we say no more, we're going to pray, we're going to worship, we're going to learn the tools that we need to speak up and preach the truth to people, amazing things will happen. God shows up, and he honors his promises. And I can tell you firsthand, he honors his promises. So don't forget, tomorrow night, 6:30, UVM at the Davis Center. I think it's the Grand Maple Ballroom. You don't want to miss it. Another episode of Dr. Turek TV. So you want to be there for that. I think we still have some more books out there as well. So if people want to look at some books that are on the table, you can do that. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here, and God bless you.
Staring down the road ahead.